Coming up on Primetime News, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry ratchets up pressure against North Korea for its recent military provocations and vows security for South Korea. And today, Korea marks the 35th anniversary of the Gwangju pro-democracy movement. But how the country remembers the solemn day remains split. Seoul slams Pyongyang for insulting President Park Geun-hye after the reclusive regime reacts to a South Korean spy report about the execution of North Korea's defense chief. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Monday, May 18th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had some hard words for Pyongyang during a press conference in Seoul earlier today.
He warned that military provocations and its rampant human rights abuses will only further isolate the North. Hwang Ji-hye starts us off.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry slammed North Korea on Monday for its latest military provocations and human rights abuses. In a press conference following talks with South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se in Seoul, Kerry warned of stronger sanctions against Pyongyang for its recent test of a submarine-launched ballistic missile.
We are indeed talking about ways to increase the pressure and increase the potential of either sanctions or other means of making it clear to him that he is on a very dangerous course in the missile systems and continued pursuit of his nuclear weapons program.
Calling the latest high-level executions as one of the most flagrant examples of the country's reckless disregard for human rights, Kerry said the North Korean leader could ultimately be punished for the abuses.
And if their horrific conduct continues, it is hard to see how that referral to the criminal court would not take place. Their behavior is against all notions of conscience, all standards of behavior, anywhere in the world.
Despite the strong words, Kerry said Washington is seeking a peaceful resolution for the Korean Peninsula, not further conflict, saying this will only be possible when Pyongyang is ready to deal with its nuclear program. Until then, he said Seoul and Washington will work together under an alliance that is stronger than ever.
Let me underscore, there is no daylight, not an inch, not a centimeter, not a microscope of difference between the United States and the Republic of Korea in our approach to the question of North Korea's provocations and its nuclear program.
Secretary Kerry also expressed the hope that successful nuclear talks with Iran next month will serve as a positive example of a more legitimate path to the global community for North Korea. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And in a meeting with U.S. service personnel after that press conference, Kerry made a statement about the controversial advanced missile defense system for the first time. He said the international community should be fully prepared for North Korean provocations, saying it's the reason why there are talks about deploying a THAAD system on South Korean soil. And the Secretary of State also touched on a sensitive rift between Korea and Japan.
He called on the neighboring countries to resolve their differences for the sake of the region. Our Kim Hyun-bin shares us Kerry's take on the issue.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry made clear on Monday that the Japanese military was behind Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women.
With respect to the powerful and important part of reconciliation that comes from the events of World War II, particularly the trafficking of women for sexual purposes by the Japanese military during that war. We have said many times that that was a terrible, egregious violation of human rights.
This marks the first time for Washington's top diplomat to point finger at the Japanese military for the trafficking of the so-called comfort woman. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe defines the woman as victims of human trafficking, but has refrained from acknowledging the military's role. Kerry also emphasized both countries need to resolve issues over their shared history, moving forward in order to promote peace and prosperity in East Asia. Following Kerry's remarks, Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se reiterated Seoul's relationship with Washington remains unhindered despite tensions with Tokyo. According to the minister, Seoul is ready to improve diplomatic ties, but added Tokyo needs to take appropriate first steps.
Abe's address in Washington last month fell short of an apology, failing to enhance relations between the two countries. But Japan has a few more opportunities to live up to its historic wrongdoings to better Seoul-Tokyo ties.
In recent months, Korea has expressed concern over the U.S. and Japan beefing up their alliance, revising defense guidelines to expand the role of Japan's self-defense forces abroad. But Kerry says that nothing can be done by Japan without Seoul's prior consent, in terms of dispatching its forces on the Korean peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korean firms at the Inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex have decided to pay out overdue April wages to workers there, but without the wage hike that North Korea demanded. According to the Kaesong Industrial Complex Management Committee, the difference in payment will be given following consultations with the North. Earlier on Monday, Seoul's Unification Ministry said that Pyongyang had turned down Seoul's offer to resume North-South joint committee talks on management of the complex, which have been stalled since last June. The two Koreas have been arguing over wages for North Korean workers at the complex, as the North unilaterally decided to raise their pay back in February, a move which Seoul rejected. The two Koreas are engaged in a war of words over recent events as well. Seoul denounced North Korea for the insult it doled out to President Park Geun-hye after Pyongyang lashed out at the president for her comments following the intelligence report about the regime's reported execution of its defense chief. For more, we turn to our Na Hyun-kyung.
A venomous snake. That's how North Korea described South Korean President Park Geun-hye in response to her remarks last week about reports that Kim Jong-un had executed Defense Chief Daniel Choy. The North waited a few days before reacting to the South Korean intel, but the lashing that started with its propaganda website on Sunday has continued. The regime's state-run Korean Central News Agency said Monday that President Park was throwing out thoughtless words that would come out of a mouth of a sleepwalking person. Later that day, Seoul rebuked Pyongyang for insulting its leader.
It's pitiful that North Korea seems to be revealing its standards by insulting the leader on the other end of a dialogue with remarks against humanity and women.
All of this comes amid growing security concerns surrounding the Korean peninsula. Pyongyang recently claimed it has successfully test-fired a ballistic missile from a submarine, and according to South Korea's intelligence agency, more than 70 senior officers in North Korea have been put to death since 2012 as Kim tries to cement his grip on power. Citing an unnamed source, South Korean media reports are saying that a minor executive officer in the North's ruling Workers' Party said he defected to the South last year because of Kim Jong-un's reign of terror. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's also in Seoul, paid a visit to President Park Geun-hye at her office earlier today. During talks, the two leaders agreed to elevate their countries' bilateral relations to a special strategic partnership, strengthening cooperation with India, the world's second most populous nation, whose economy ranks 10th in the world, holds significance for Korea. Our Choi Yu-sun reports.
In materializing their special strategic partnership, President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed on 11 ways to expand cooperation. It includes holding a summit each year and regular meetings on diplomacy, security, and defense. Prime Minister Modi backed President Park's trust-building and unification policies with North Korea and her peace and co-prosperity initiatives in Northeast Asia and Eurasia. In an effort to further spur two-way trade, which totaled $18 billion last year, the two leaders agreed to start negotiations on a revision to their trade pact by the first half of next year. Under the current trade deal, only 85% of traded goods are subject to tariff concessions, compared to 90% in India's trade pact with Japan. Seoul also agreed to prepare $10 billion in support for Korean firms that participate in India's infrastructure projects, along with deals signed to bolster cooperation in areas of renewable energy, shipping, and distribution. With President Park welcoming the Indian leader's Make in India initiative to foster his country's manufacturing sector, the two sides will look into Korean shipbuilders taking part in New Delhi's $1.8 billion project to construct 9 units of LNG carriers. Prime Minister Modi plans to further promote his Make in India campaign in meetings with Korean business leaders on Tuesday. Also on his itinerary is a trip down to the southeastern city of Ulsan, home to Hyundai Heavy Industries, the world's largest shipyard. There, he hopes to appeal to Korean shipbuilders to invest more in his country. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Today marks the 35th anniversary of the May 18th democratic uprising that took place in Korea's southwestern city of Gwangju in 1980. While a national event honored the thousands who gave their lives to the movement, it failed to honor them with one voice. Park Ji-hye tells us more.
35 years ago in the city of Gwangju, more than 200 people were killed or went missing, and thousands were wounded during a bloody crackdown by government troops to quell the uprising against the authoritarian Chun Doo-hwan regime. Chun grabbed power in a military coup after the assassination of President Park Geun-hye in late 1979. Democratization movements swept the nation, and the clash between the government and protesters culminated in Gwangju on that fateful day in 1980. The May 18th democratic uprising is now considered one of the hallmarks of Korea's democracy movement. To keep the spirit of the movement alive, the Korean government designated May 18th an official Memorial Day in 1997. This year, around 2,000 people attended the government memorial service, including Deputy Prime Minister Choi Kyung-hwan, both rival party leaders Kim Moo-sung and Moon Jae-in, and ordinary citizens. Relatives of the victims of the uprising and local politicians and civic activists, however, attended a separate memorial service organized to protest the government's policy on a song that was symbolic for the uprising. March for Our Beloved was written in 1981 to honor those who died during the movement. It had been sung at the government ceremonies by all attendees since 2003. But in 2009, the conservative then Lee Myung-bak administration excluded from the main ceremony. Citing the song's appearance in a 1991 North Korean film, the administration said it could disrupt national unity. Since then, the relatives of the victims have held a separate ceremony, saying the government has degraded the victims by excluding the song. The National Assembly passed a resolution in 2013 urging the government to make the song the official song of the landmark democratic movement to respect the spirit of the uprising. Park Ji-hye, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye's top political affairs aide calls it quits for failing to meet the president's civil servants' pension reform drive. Rival parties held a meeting today to push the stalled reform bill, but failed to make any headway. Our Ji Myung-gil has the details.
President Park Geun-hye's senior political affairs secretary Cho Yun-sun stepped down Monday after the civil service pension bill failed to win parliamentary approval earlier this month. Cho said, "I take responsibility for failing to meet the president's expectations on reforming the civil servants' pension system. It is unfortunate that the plan is being complicated by other reform issues." Cho's resignation comes after the presidential office of Cheong Wa-dae voiced opposition to support of a bipartisan deal on reforming the pension system for public employees along with revisions to the National Pension Fund. In order to narrow their differences over the controversial bill, the deputy floor leaders of the main rival parties met on Monday, but only reaffirmed their differences on the issue.
Last Friday's meeting with the ruling party, government, and the presidential office only reaffirmed that they would back away from the original agreement made with the opposition. It is not right to pin the responsibility on the senior political secretary. It is unfortunate that the revised civil service pension bill failed to pass on May 6. I hope other important bills will be able to get parliamentary approval at the next voting session.
Rival parties failed to endorse the civil service pension bill due to differences over possible changes in benefits to the government-run national pension system. But the presidential office says it's a much larger issue that needs societal consensus. Korea has been facing a looming crisis over the deficit-ridden civil servants' pension system, as previous governments delayed addressing the issue, despite being aware that the pension scheme was not sustainable. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Shifting gears now, starting in December, customers will be able to open up bank accounts without having to physically visit banks. The Financial Services Commission said Monday that it will allow such services as part of efforts to ease regulations in the financial industry and help boost the financial technology sector. With the revision, customers will be able to send in their scanned identification documents and go through interviews online instead of having to present the information in person at the bank. The decision comes on the back of the financial authority's decision to lift barriers that have kept fintech firms from prospering. Korea's top financial regulator added that it will encourage banks to equip themselves with systems to make indirect identification possible by the month of August. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba Group has opened up Tmall in Korea, a shopping platform that sells Korean products. Alibaba founder Jack Ma and Korea's finance minister Choi Kyung-hwan were at site of the launching ceremony on Monday. The launch of the business-to-consumer shopping platform aims to put out Korean agricultural and manufactured goods as well as tourism-related products. The Korea International Trade Association says that the introduction of the China's top internet company will help Korean SMEs business who wants to sell their products on the marketplace. China's top internet company is also providing an internship opportunity for Korean youths beginning in July, helping them get a better understanding of the Chinese consumers and Korea's e-commerce market. The Korea Cup International Yacht Race is underway in the eastern waters of Korea.
And this year's event is more than just a sporting event. It has a special meaning since it's being held in the year marking the 70th anniversary of Korea's independence from Japan.
And the highlight of the six-day event is the so-called Dokdo Race, where the sailors make their way around Korea's easternmost island. Our Connie Kim takes us there.
It's time for a yachting competition in Korea. Sailors from all four corners of the world gathered in the eastern coastal city of Ulsan this weekend for the 8th Korea Cup International Yacht Race. Participants are competing in either of two races. The inshore race is a 2 to 4 kilometer course in waters around Ulsan. But the highlight of the event is the offshore course, also called the Dokdo Race. On this course, sailors depart from Ulsan, make their way to Ullungdo Island and Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island, and then sail back to their departure point in Ulsan. It's not an easy task, especially for first-time participants, but the sailors say it's all about the experience.
It's just the fact of being invited to Korea, to this exotic place for us, and participate on the regatta going to Dokdo Island. Just got my lights on and said, okay, let's go for it.
For the Korean sailors, participating in the race is something of a show of affection for the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island, which Japan claims as its territory.
I love yachts, I love the sea, and I love our Dokdo. I participate in this race every year in an effort to protect territory Dokdo.
17 yachts are competing in this offshore race dubbed Marathon on the Sea. They'll be sailing about 1,000 kilometers in just 60 hours. As the yachts made their turn around Dokdo on Sunday, a special ceremony was held to mark the 70th anniversary of Korea's independence from Japan in 1945.
Our aim is to promote Dokdo as our territory and let the world know about the beauty of the island through this sailing competition.
As long as Japan's claims to Dokdo continue, Korea's efforts to promote it as its own territory through this event will continue. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Ulsan.
And for the top international headlines, we connect to Paul E.
Our focus today, another city in Iraq falls to Islamic State fighters. Thousands of refugees flee from violence in Burundi. And America's sweetheart Taylor Swift wins big at the Billboard Music Awards.
Paul, let's head straight to the Middle East. It's been nearly a year since President Obama ordered U.S. forces to tackle the threat posed by IS. Still, the jihadist group continues to make gains.
That's right. Despite a string of recent victories against the militants, the fall of Ramadi is being described as a major setback for the U.S.-led coalition, which has been bombing IS targets for several months now. Video footage posted on social media purportedly shows fierce battles for control of the central Iraqi city in Anbar province. The unverified video also showed the group's black flag being raised over the local government compound on Friday. Earlier, Iraqi officials reported that government forces evacuated the last military base in Ramadi after it came under attack. This as Shiite paramilitary groups were preparing a counteroffensive on Monday in response to the biggest defeat for Baghdad since last summer. And turning to Southeast Africa, the United Nations says more than 100,000 people have fled from Burundi to escape the rising tide of political violence. The majority of the refugees escaped to Tanzania, with thousands more said to be arriving each day. International aid agencies are bracing for a humanitarian crisis, with many more remaining stranded with little or no supplies.
This is the third time we have been forced to become refugees, and we will not go back to Burundi. During the last conflict, we were forced to flee into Tanzania, and Tanzania welcomed us and treated us well. But we were later forced to repatriate back home without much. When we arrived back to our home country, no one helped us.
An attempted coup by a military general last week sparked fresh clashes among divided security forces, marking the worst violence that hit Burundi since the end of a civil war in 2005. And switching gears to the music industry, American pop star Taylor Swift has dominated this year's Billboard Music Awards, winning 8 honors, including Top Artist and Best Album. The 25-year-old, who received 14 nominations, beat out her main rival Sam Smith Sunday night in Las Vegas. The British soul singer was still able to walk away with Best Male Artist, with the band One Direction picking up Top Group for 2015.
I am so happy to win this for 1989 because I was so lucky to get to work with people like Max Martin and Shellback and Ryan Tedder and Imogen Heap, Nathan Chapman, just Jack Antonoff, incredible people that are so talented. And then we put it out and you guys embraced change, embraced me doing something new. I'll never forget it.
Billboard magazine said its final list of nominees was based on a wide range of factors, from album sales, ticket concert sales, online streaming, to interactions with fans on social media. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
A new week has kicked off under heavy clouds and breezy conditions today, but things will brighten up tomorrow, especially down south, where more sun is in the forecast. So the UV index will hit high levels in the southern regions. So if you're there, be sure to have the sun protection. And that strong sunshine will also push temperatures to 30 in Daegu tomorrow afternoon, while the metro areas will have similar readings today. So let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. The high in Seoul will reach 22, while Daegu and Gwangju hits 30, and Busan will top out at 25 tomorrow afternoon. And as for the other regions, Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 28 and 23, and Dokdo will top out at 23. Now, as we have passed the mid-May mark, temperatures will noticeably get warmer each day under a fair amount of sunshine. Well, that's all for the weather. Have a wonderful evening.
Well, a wise woman once said that true democracy, it's important for people to be able to tell the difference between true democracy and a parody of democracy, which is worse than an obvious dictatorship. And let us be reminded of that fact and always be vigilant to keep an open eye for such changes, because we must make sure that the sacrifices made on this day in history, the May democratization movement in Gwangju, was not in vain. And that wraps up our newscast for today. Thank you so much for staying with us. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Please join us at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.